because last week we learned how expensive our response to climate change is going to be. President Obama's budget blueprint established potential domestic costs, and today's hearing will highlight the mounting international demands. The world is expecting increased energy efficiency from the developing world, and the developing world is demanding compensation in return. We've known for a while that the cap and tax policy, which is my name for the carbon trading system President Obama is advocating, will significantly harm the U.S. economy. In his budget blueprint last week, President Obama sketched out a cap and tax plan that will require approximately $80 billion a year from U.S. taxpayers. By 2020, Americans will have paid $646 billion to fund this scheme. And while $646 billion is a shocking number, or at least it used to be, it pales in comparison to the demands of developing countries. India's government stated that the developed nations owe billions of dollars to developing nations to compensate for climate change. In its submission to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Indian government argued that this funding should be a legal obligation for developed countries that cannot be subject to the decisions of developed country governments or legislatures. How that flies in the face of our Constitution's requirement that nothing be paid out of the Treasury except by appropriation, I don't know. They added that this funding should not be in the form of loans and that the providers of finance cannot be discretionary donors but must be legally obligated assessees. In its own submission, China argued that the developed nations should provide new, additional, adequate, predictable, and sustainable funding of at least 0.5% to 1% of a nation's GDP over and above existing foreign aid. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Joint Program on the Science and Policy of Global Change, a supporter of cap and tax policies, estimated that welfare costs to developed countries could be over $400 billion per year in 2020, rising to over $3 trillion per year in 2050. And over $1 trillion of this would come from the United States. As the MIT study notes, this scheme goes well beyond compensating for mitigating costs and turns the mitigation policy into an instrument for global income redistribution, unquote. Several developing countries have made efforts to increase their energy efficiency, which is good. But many of these countries have publicly stated their good intentions and aspirational goals to reduce their emissions, but it is their willingness and ability to actually implement these policies that will determine the ultimate success of our global efforts. China has already resisted enforcement of WTO's trade rules. The U.S. Trade Representative found in its 2008 report to Congress on China's WTO compliance that, quote, China has yet to fully implement important commitments, and in other areas significant questions have arisen regarding China's adherence to ongoing WTO obligations, including core WTO principles. In my role as a member and former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I sure have found that out due to the lack of enforcement by China of intellectual property rights laws, even though the Chinese law on the books looks as good as the United States' law or the laws that are in the European Union. A post-Kyoto treaty cannot succeed without China's participation, but can we expect China's compliance with the climate change treaty given its history with the WTO? I think the answer is obvious. Today's witness, Lee Lane, a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, rightly recognizes that technological development is the crucial long-term priority. Politics is the art of the possible, but current proposals for emissions reductions go beyond not only what's politically possible, but also what's actually achievable. Nations cannot afford to meet greenhouse gas reduction goals without substantial advances in energy technology. The development of technology, not higher taxes or global wealth redistribution schemes, should be where Congress focuses its efforts to confront climate change. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and learning more about what role technology can play in these important climate change negotiations leading to the UN Conference of the Parties in Copenhagen this December. Thank you.
Gentleman's time.